He smirked while the judge read the final decree. I remember the way his jaw tightened when the clerk said, "All marital assets awarded to Damian Cole. The mansion, the companies, the cars, the investment accounts, even the small subsidiary I built with my own hands. He took everything." I stood there feeling stripped to bone, holding nothing but a locked black box and my father's worn journals. He thought he had destroyed me, but 3 months later, his empire began collapsing. And the one thing he believed he had won was the very thing that would ruin him. Welcome back to Storyverse Vault, my beautiful, amazing Story Vault family. You all have been so supportive, and I promise to always try my best to give you the best stories as I learn and improve every day. If this is your first time coming across my video, do comment below where you are watching from. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story from our channel. Now let's get into today's story. Aria Cole had always preferred strategy over spotlight. She was the quiet mind behind Cole Dynamics, the tech empire that reshaped logistics across 3 continents. Damian Cole was the face, charismatic, sharp, unapologetically ambitious. The press called him visionary. They called them a power couple. But inside the glass walls of their headquarters, Aria was the architect. She designed the supply chains that cut operational costs by 40%. And now she negotiated international investors who trusted her calm precision more than his charm. She wrote the optimization algorithms that made their flagship product indispensable. Damian presented it as his breakthrough. She let him. I used to believe partnership meant shared victory. I told myself it didn't matter who got the applause. "We built this together," I would whisper when headlines praised him alone. He would squeeze my hand under the table at award ceremonies. But as cameras flashed, his grip became tighter. Possessive, not affectionate. The applause changed him. Success fed something restless inside him. He started correcting me in meetings. Musk started introducing me as my brilliant but overly cautious wife. Replaceable. That was the word he used one night when he thought I couldn't hear. The younger executive arrived 6 months later. Elena Vasquez. Sharp suits, sharper ambition. Damian assigned her to high-level strategy sessions that Aria once led. Board members began whispering in corridors. Late-night meetings became urgent. Financial reports were shared selectively. Aria noticed subtle shifts in share distribution, minor transfers at first, then larger movements through shell corporations registered overseas. When she asked Damian directly, he smiled. "On diversification," he said. She began running quiet audits of her own. The audits confirmed it. Damian was restructuring ownership without her knowledge. Shares were being moved into offshore entities linked to anonymous trustees. Board voting power was shifting, slowly, deliberately. By the time Aria confronted the chief financial officer, he avoided eye contact. He had already pledged loyalty to Damian. The trap had been set months in advance. Divorce papers arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. Irreconcilable differences, request for immediate asset evaluation. I wasn't shocked by the divorce. I was shocked by the timing. He waited until the share transfers were complete, until the board was secured, until I had no voting leverage left. I sat across from him in our kitchen the night the papers arrived. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "This is business," he said calmly. "We both know I'm the one investors believe in." I looked at the marble floors we chose together, at the house that was about to become solely his, and I realized he had been planning this for a long time. Damian assembled the most aggressive legal team money could buy. High-profile attorneys known for corporate warfare. They painted Aria as emotionally unstable, too attached to outdated systems, non-essential to daily operations. Forged documents appeared minimizing her involvement in early development stages. Board members testified that Damian was the primary visionary. Aria's lawyer objected repeatedly, but the narrative was already set. Public opinion followed money. During settlement negotiations, Damian made one specific demand. He wanted full ownership of everything. Every holding, every patent, every subsidiary, including a small, overlooked logistics infrastructure company Aria had registered years earlier. It barely generated revenue. Most people forgot it existed. Her lawyer leaned toward her. "Fight this one," he whispered. Aria studied Damian's face across the table. He wanted control, complete control. That small company meant nothing to him, except that it meant everything. I hesitated long enough to make him believe I was defeated. Then I signed. Every line, every clause. I kept only my father's journals, a locked black box from my office safe, and one encrypted hard drive no one asked about. Outside the courthouse, Damian laughed. "I built you," he said quietly. "Don't forget that." I looked at him one last time. "No," I replied calmly. "You just took what you think is valuable." 3 months later, Damian stood before a wall of screens displaying green upward arrows. Cole Dynamics had just announced a record-breaking quarter. Financial anchors praised his decisive leadership post-divorce. The stock surged 12% in a single morning. Employees applauded during the internal broadcast. Elena stood at his side, now officially promoted to Chief Strategy Officer. Damian felt invincible. He believed removing Aria had streamlined everything. Control was clean now, any uncontested. He lifted a glass in his penthouse office overlooking the city and declared the future secure. The first crack appeared quietly. A major international shipping partner in Singapore terminated its contract without warning. An automated compliance alert flagged inconsistencies in delivery metrics. Damian dismissed it as transitional turbulence. Elena assured him the operations team would recalibrate. But inside the logistics dashboard, unseen by investors, error rates spiked. Routing inefficiencies multiplied. Warehouses reported delays caused by corrupted optimization sequences. Engineers worked overnight trying to isolate the failure. The system responded unpredictably, as if missing an invisible instruction. I watched the news from a modest apartment across the city. I had chosen silence. I had chosen distance. But when the first supplier terminated their agreement, I knew what had happened. He owned the structure. He didn't own the core. The master control layer was never transferred. He never asked for it because he never knew it existed. The algorithm responded only to authenticated architecture keys. Keys I never surrendered. I closed my laptop slowly. This was not revenge. This was inevitability. Inside headquarters, panic began spreading. A European manufacturing partner reported shipment misalignments costing millions. Internal audits revealed that back-end authorization loops were failing. The optimization engine that once predicted demand, with near-perfect accuracy, began producing distorted outputs. Board members demanded explanations. Damian blamed technical staff. He authorized emergency patches. But every attempted fix triggered new instabilities. It was like trying to repair a machine without access to its blueprint. Damian ordered a forensic tech investigation. External consultants combed through layers of code. They discovered something unsettling. The intellectual property ownership of the core infrastructure traced back to the useless subsidiary he demanded during the divorce. That small entity legally held the foundational patents, licensing authority, encryption protocols, and embedded within the legal framework was a clause requiring original architect authorization for operational overrides. The name registered as original architect was unmistakable. Aria Cole. I structured it years ago, not out of fear, out of foresight. Damian loved expansion but ignored safeguards, so I separated ownership from operational control. I embedded redundancy through legal architecture instead of technical code alone. If anything destabilized the system, it required the architect's biometric confirmation. He signed every document transferring ownership without reading the fine structure, because control mattered more to him than comprehension. I never planned to use that protection, unless he forced my hand. The stock dropped 9% in a single afternoon. Media outlets shifted tone from praise to scrutiny. Analysts questioned whether the company's growth had been artificially inflated. Whispers of internal instability circulated among investors. Elena confronted Damian in his office. She demanded transparency about the subsidiary clause. He dismissed her concerns, insisting legal teams would override it. But lawyers confirmed the clause was airtight. Ownership did not grant system authority. And authorization belonged to Aria. I received the first indirect message through an intermediary attorney. A polite inquiry. A request to discuss technical cooperation. I declined. Not out of anger, out of clarity. The system was designed to prevent unilateral power. He dismantled the partnership. Now he faced the consequence of singular control. I walked past a newsstand showing headlines about declining investor confidence. I felt no satisfaction, only confirmation. The second collapse was catastrophic. A North American distribution center halted operations after system synchronization failed entirely. Orders froze mid-processing. Clients demanded penalties for breach of contract. Regulatory agencies initiated preliminary inquiries into possible data mismanagement. The stock plunged an additional 18% by closing bell. Inside the executive suite, Damian stared at the red numbers flooding his screens. For the first time since the divorce, uncertainty crossed his face. He finally understood. He had taken everything, except the one thing that made it work. The third collapse did not come from software. It came from people. Board members convened an emergency session without press access. They demanded a full systems audit and immediate stabilization. Damian presented projections that no longer convinced anyone. Institutional investors threatened withdrawal if operational integrity was not restored within 30 days. Elena sat rigidly beside him, avoiding eye contact. For the first time, his authority felt conditional. The empire no longer responded to his voice. It responded to absence. I knew the timeline before they did. The cascading failures were mathematical. When core authentication remains unresolved, dependent systems degrade in sequence. First logistics, then licensing validations, then international compliance filters. I had built safeguards that required alignment. Without it, entropy spreads. I told myself I would not intervene. But when regulators initiated formal inquiries, I understood he would come himself. Regulatory letters arrived at corporate headquarters within 48 hours. Financial authorities questioned irregular offshore transfers executed months before the divorce. The shell entities Damian had used to consolidate voting power were now under scrutiny. Internal compliance officers demanded documentation trails. Legal advisors urged immediate cooperation. Media outlets began connecting instability with questionable financial restructuring. Elena distanced herself publicly, issuing statements about limited tenure during transition. The narrative shifted from technical failure to executive misconduct. He came to my door without an appointment. No cameras, no lawyers, just Damian. His suit was immaculate, but his composure was fractured. For a moment, we stood in silence. "I need your help," he said finally, not as a command, as a request. I felt the weight of years compress into that single sentence. They sat across a small dining table that replaced marble and glass. Damian outlined the crisis in clipped, precise terms. He avoided mentioning the investigation directly. He focused on operational collapse. He claimed investors only needed reassurance. Aria listened without interruption. Then she placed the locked black box on the table. The sound of it settling against wood shifted the tone of the room. I opened the box slowly. Inside rested the master system authorization device, biometric verification hardware linked to the core infrastructure. Beside it were copies of compliance documentation I had preserved. Proof of financial manipulation, time-stamped, verified. I never wanted to use it, but I needed him to understand leverage was not loud. It was prepared. Damian's eyes moved between the device and the documents. He realized that stabilization required her access. He also understood exposure of the financial evidence would escalate investigations beyond repair. Silence expanded between them. Aria slid a single printed document across the table. A buyback agreement, 60% controlling interest reassigned to her, immediate resignation from executive authority, full cooperation clause regarding regulatory proceedings. I watched his pride wrestle with survival. He had built power on dominance. Now he had to choose between collapse and concession. His hand trembled once, then steadied. He signed. No theatrics, no negotiation, just ink binding consequence to choice. When he finished, he did not look at me. Within 72 hours, official announcements were released. Damian Cole resigned, citing personal reasons. Aria Cole returned as chief executive officer, effective immediately. Markets reacted cautiously at first, then steadily. Operational authorization was restored. System integrity realigned. International partners reopened dialogue. The stock stabilized before climbing gradually upward. Control returned not through force, but structure. The first executive meeting under Aria's leadership began at exactly 8 a.m. No applause, no speeches, only data. She stood at the head of the long glass table and reviewed operational metrics line by line. System authorization had been restored 12 hours earlier. Back-end synchronization was already stabilizing global routing channels. Warehouse automation errors dropped by 30% overnight. Licensing validations reconnected across European servers. The board members watched her carefully, measuring tone and posture. She did not mention Damian. She did not assign blame. She assigned responsibilities. I felt the weight of the room, but not the pressure. This was familiar ground. I rebuilt the command layers calmly, reactivating predictive modules one sector at a time. The master system recognized my authentication instantly. It responded like an engine returning to its original driver. No theatrics, just precision. Every fix was deliberate, every decision documented. Control is not loud when it is earned. Regulatory investigators intensified their review of financial transfers executed during Damian's consolidation phase. Because of the cooperation clause, internal records were surrendered without resistance. The preserved documentation Aria retained ensured transparency. Offshore shell accounts were traced methodically. Public statements emphasized structural reform and executive accountability. Investors interpreted the shift as a reset rather than collapse. Market confidence strengthened as governance measures were reinforced. The company began distancing itself from prior irregularities. Damian moved into a furnished apartment overlooking a quieter part of the city. No skyline dominance, no private elevator. He attended meetings with attorneys instead of shareholders. His name remained in headlines, but not as visionary. Regulatory hearings scheduled preliminary testimony dates. Elena issued a formal resignation and accepted a position overseas. Former allies limited contact. Influence shrank faster than revenue ever had. I did not celebrate his fall. I focused on reconstruction. Global partners returned after direct conversations with me. I assured them continuity, not revenge. We restructured risk oversight and decentralized key authority layers. No single executive would ever hold unchecked control again. The subsidiary framework remained intact but transparent. Strength through balance. That was the future model. 6 months later, quarterly reports exceeded projections set before the divorce. Stock valuation surpassed its previous peak by 8%. Expansion into 2 emerging markets was finalized. Industry analysts credited disciplined restructuring. Employees described leadership as steady rather than charismatic. The culture shifted from personality-driven to system-driven. The empire no longer depended on a single name. It functioned because its architecture was respected. Damian watched the broadcast from his living room. The screen reflected against the dark window behind him. He muted the volume before analysts finished praising the turnaround. There were no calls from board members, no invitations to conferences, only scheduled court dates and compliance interviews. He had taken every asset in the divorce. But responsibility followed ownership, and responsibility exposed what he never understood. Aria stood alone in the executive office that once belonged solely to him. The skyline stretched wide beyond reinforced glass. She placed her father's journals inside the desk drawer. The black lockbox rested securely in the safe, unopened. She did not need leverage anymore. The system worked because it was designed to work. Damian had taken everything he thought mattered. What he really took was accountability for a structure he never built. And the woman he underestimated was the reason it ever stood. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below. Tell me what part hit hardest. Stay connected for more stories where power shifts quietly and consequences arrive without warning.